All right, so I'm now going to do the official introduction, which is the part where Catriona gets to sit and listen to me say all the amazing things she's done. So Catriona is currently the Associate Director of the Abbey Theatre, Ireland, where this year she will direct Marina Carr's new 6-hour play cycle called The Boy for the Abbey and Dublin Theatre Festival. In 2020, she will also direct Mozart's The Abduction from the Seraglio, I really hope I'm pronouncing that right, for Irish National Opera, and will create a production of Sean O'Casey's The Plough and the Stars with a community cast from East Wall region of Dublin to be performed on the Abbey stage. Catriona is from Donegal. Over the last few years, she's directed primarily in London, Dublin, and New York. Recent productions at the Abbey include On Raftery's Hill by Marina Carr, for which she won Best Director at the 2019 Irish Times Irish Theatre Awards. City Song by Dylan Coburn-Bray, which won an Irish Times Theatre Award nomination for Best New Play. 2 Pints by Roddy Doyle. Josephine K. in the Algorithms by Stacey Gregg, and Monsters, Dinosaurs, Ghosts by Jimmy McAlevey, all for the Abbey. Catriona also works on large-scale community projects with numerous organisations, including TV production company Shinawil, the International Red Cross, Big Telly, the WEA, Stage Beyond, and the Local Group. She has managed and facilitated the inauguration of the Royal Court Theatre Local Project and was awarded a Clore Fellowship in 2009. Catriona has been invited several times as a director-dramaturge, initially by the then artistic director, the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, to Labyrinth Theatre Company's Summer Intensive in New York. And that is quite enough for me, so I will now gratefully hand over to Catriona. Catriona, are you there? I'm just going to unmute you. That's probably a good start.
Hello.
Hi, Catriona. You're very welcome.
So just to give you all a little bit of a warning, I've been sitting for the last 10 minutes on the wrong Zoom call, which is exactly what my technical ability is like. So you're my guinea pigs. I've never done this before, so I apologize in advance for anything I don't do clearly or accurately. And please, somebody let me know if there's something I'm saying or doing that's not clear or needs clarification, but we will have time for questions at the end, won't we, Tanya? Or throughout, or?
Yes, we got time for Q&A at the end.
Okay. So, where to start? So, Tanya, sorry, before you go away, you're on mute, so I can't.
I'll unmute myself.
Just something I forgot to ask you. Do we need to include a little break at some point in this?
If you are so motivated, you actually absolutely can. The last couple of webinars that we've done went 2 hours straight through. If you need a break, we can absolutely build one. Honestly, kind of, you're the boss for this. Nobody's here to see me.
Okay, great. Lovely. Okay. So, hello, everybody. I can see most of you. I'll just scroll through. So just to talk a little bit about what Tanya has asked me to do is to talk to you about how I collaborate with other theatre makers. I suppose primarily actors, as most of you are involved in acting or hoping to be when you graduate, but also the designers and assistant directors or co-directors or choreographers or any collaboration really. So I suppose, and then a little bit about sort of the process that I go through and how I work really as a director in our industry. And it's been really interesting to think about that at the moment when we are kept away from our live connections. But I just thought that the best way to start was to ask you to think about a few questions. And as other theatre makers or potential collaborators, shall we say, I want to ask you, am I somebody that you want to work with in the future? And if yes, why? And that's not a trivial question, because I think that very often we forget that it's a two-way street. particularly actors, they seem to forget that you have to choose as much as I have to choose when you come into a room if I'm the right collaborator for you. So that is really important note to remember. And I think a lot of early theatre makers forget that you're not anyway secondary in the collaboration. And this is something, now obviously everything I'm saying to you is my perspective. There's no rule on it, and you'll meet other people that have a different perspective. But I'm really keen that anyone who comes in to meet me in a room is wondering, am I the right collaborator for them as much as they are for me? And we'll go through a little bit about what different things that I might be looking for later. But I think that question is really fundamental. The other question is, do I want to work with you? Why? You have to tell me why, because 9 times out of 10, I have no idea. I have no idea what you're interested in. I have no idea where you come from or how you approach theatre, or what kind of theatre you like, or what kind of theatre is important, or what your process is. And I think it's really important that we start thinking about that right from the beginning of our careers, because it's something I did not know about. I was one of those people who was very grateful to get in any room and then immediately apologizing for getting there and not knowing what to do with myself. So it's really important, I think, that you have a very clear sense of why you want to come into my room and why I should be the right person to work with. The third question actually I want you to think about is, do our ideas about theatre align? Do we both agree that theatre is the same thing, that we want the same things from it, that we have the same belief system in regards to how it's made, that we prioritize in a similar way? Yes or no? Do our ideas about theatre align? And if your answer is no, then do we clash in a way that's interesting for an audience to experience? Is that going to be something that's going to bring an audience something new? Is there a value in our ideas clashing, or our ideas about theatre? If your answer is yes, then what do we want to say together that's going to push us out of our own comfort zone? What do we want to say to an audience that's going to push us? Because one of the dangers of finding people that are very like-minded is you get into a very safe bubble and you make work that is very self-congratulatory and very enjoyable for the makers and not necessarily very relevant to an audience. So how are we going to stretch each other if our ideas about theatre align? So that's kind of the idea. Those kind of questions are the sort of premise on which I'm going to talk for the rest of this webinar. I was going to say seminar. And I think it's really, it's not going to be in a super structured way. I've got a few things to show you, but they're more, because it's a masterclass, it's more about sharing ideas. There's no absolute from my perspective. The one thing that I have learned categorically is that everything I think changes every time I meet a new collaborator. And I think you need to be open to that when you set rules for yourself. There are basic habits that I prefer, but basically everything changes when you meet new collaborators. So, and I think that's a good place to start. So in terms of what my ideas about theatre are and why it's important to me, is that first of all, I fundamentally believe it's collaborative. That means that the first thing that I try and do personally is eliminate a hierarchical structure. Now, ultimately as a director, I am the person kind of making the final choices. But everything that I do is about trying to eliminate that position and make that as invisible as possible. Because to me, it's really important that everybody feels they have a voice in the room. So what that actually looks like is when I go to meet designers, I will ask the same questions that I've just asked you. Am I sure? Are they sure I'm the right person to work with? I bring them some ideas and mood board to them. These are where I'm thinking. I don't expect them to just give me all their ideas and then me take them and go off and hire kind of coolest, fanciest other collaborator somewhere else and bring their ideas to them, which can happen. So it has to be, you have to, if you're interested in the idea of a non-hierarchical system, you have to be the person to initiate it, no matter what that position is. So if you're the actor and you feel a little bit lower in the rank, you're a new actor in a room full of experienced actors, then you have to find a way to find your authority in that room. And that's, I know, not that easy, but there's a couple of things that I do as a director to try and make that happen for an actor. The first thing we do, and this is completely stolen from Katie Mitchell, the first thing we do in the room is, as a company, everybody reads the script. Now, one thing I learned very early on is that you get a whole range of experience. You get the actors in the room who have read the script inside out, read every other play the writer wrote, watched every version of that play and are full of information. And then you get the actor who hasn't opened it. You see them cracking open their seal on the script the day they arrive. And you get every variation in between. I know 2 directors personally who, if you come into the room and you haven't opened the script as an actor, you get fired on the spot. I think that's really interesting, and I think that's fair, actually. I have never done that, but I love the idea of it. And because it immediately assumes that somebody is going to give you everything, you know, when you come into the room. And that's not a collaborative practice, to come in and be told what to do like that. So the first thing we do on the first day of rehearsal is we all read the script together, one line at a time. Just a little, aside. Tanya, I'm going to ignore the chat box, and if anything comes in, questions for me, will you find a way to ask them to me? Because otherwise I'll just keep clicking on it and distracting myself.
Sure thing, okay. I'm on it.
So as we go around the room, we read line by line, so a chunk of text each, or a piece of dialogue each, including stage directions. Now that is a really, it's totally robbed from the director, Katie Mitchell. I did a course with her and that's what she did. But why I do it is, I learned very early on that people come into the room with all kinds of baggage and all kinds of nervousness and all kinds of fear. And then other people come in and they try and perform the entire play on the first read through. And I am not interested in that. I'm not interested in anybody thinking that they know what the play is by themselves, if you know what I mean. It has to be in relationship to the other collaborators in the room. Otherwise, it's, to me, not necessarily valid. So what I say when I mean that I want people to have done work coming into the room, I don't want them to have anything learned, and I don't want them to have anything set. What I want them to come into the room with is a load of questions about their character, about the play, about the scenes they're in. So we read line by line around the room. The second thing that used to give me the horrors was when you saw an actor flick to sort of page 56, oh yeah, that's my scene there, close the book, sit back and, you know, think about the shopping list until we come to page 50. So when you read line by line around the room, you eliminate the idea that people can only think about their own part in relation to the whole. You also eliminate any sort of lead actor versus smaller actor thinking, which I think is a nonsense anyway, but some people cannot help thinking like that. if the designers are in the room, I will ask them to read a line. And if the stage manager is there, they will always be there, and they will read a line, or sometimes they'll ask them to read the stage directions, so that the actual, who is holding the story for the end performance is the actors' voices. So right from day one, we're trying to eliminate any sense of hierarchy in the cast and in the actual company. We also do, I've now started to ask people to put into the contract that they have to engage in some element of physical aspect to the day. Now, I don't like to use warm up, because that sort of that gives the sense that it's somehow separate from the rehearsal. And the physical work that I do, and I work a lot with Sue Maiden, isn't separate from the rehearsal. It is teaching us a shared language. Usually it's not explicit, it's not spoken, or it's not, I don't tell you what we're doing necessarily, but I'm learning how people move. I'm learning where natural physical gestures happen. I'm learning how a company learns each other's physical language. So I tend to watch that, but it's an essential part of the building up of a company and the production. I will be very clear to say repeatedly in the first couple of weeks, I have no idea what we're going to do. We're going to find out together. Now, the truth is, of course, there's a whole load of preparation that I have done. So it's in a particular context that I don't know what we're going to do. And this sort of leads into something I would like to talk about in relation to actors in general, which is the idea of instinct. And somehow, you often get very successful, very professional actors saying, oh, they don't like to over prepare, they don't like to rehearse, they like to go on instinct. Well, I think that's all very well and good when you've spent 10 or 15 years honing your craft, working more often than anyone else. That is your preparation. The best actors in the world read plays, watch films. They do a hell of a lot of preparation. They know things in their bones. Like I recently listened to Andrew Scott saying that he hates to research for a play, but Andrew Scott has done a huge amount of research in his past. So his instinct now is a development of his huge knowledge and huge vast experience. So I would be very careful thinking that you're somehow going to kill an instinct by doing research or doing preparation work or anything, because it's what allows you to have an instinct, if you know what I mean. So that's the kind of work that I'm talking about before we come into the room. Is that clear what I'm saying by that? Is that okay? Thumbs up if we're all okay. Okay, good. So in terms of the very beginning of a process, then we eliminate the hierarchy, and I try to use we as much as possible. So we try and give equal weight to designers, to actors, to musicians, to everyone in the room. Give everyone an equal voice within reason, obviously. So that sort of brings me to how you end up with a project in the first place, which is kind of depends, like, how will I describe it? So the director tends to be seen as the primary artist once you get into the rehearsal room, the writer beforehand, and the actor once we have an audience. And there's a kind of a shape shifting that happens with the production through that process. But the reality of working, which is something I think we need to be a little bit more honest about, is that's not necessarily always the case. We all end up in jobs for different reasons. The ideal scenario is that you go to a theatre and you say, I want to do this production. I want to do it with these people, I need this amount of money, and I want it to run for this many weeks. That never, ever happens. A variation on it can happen, but equally, a theatre will come to you with a production, and you will be the person who will have to decide whether to do it or how to respond to that. And sometimes half-made projects come, so there's already collaborators, and then they'll bring you in to that. And again, I think those questions are really, really important. Do you want to work with these people? Do your ideas on theatre align? Why are you coming to them, and why should they come to you? And it's really, really hard, because we all take jobs for hundreds of reasons: for money, for experience, because we need work, for our own sense of self, for our ego, so that we are working. But at the end of the day, and this is something that somebody asked me and has become a kind of a key to my professional life. If you see yourself as an artist, then you have to start practicing that from the beginning of your career. Somebody asked me once, was I an artist? And I said, no, I'm a director, don't be ridiculous. And then they said, you need to think about why you are making theatre. And now, fortunately, that was fairly early on, when I was stupidly thinking that I just worked with artists rather than was one. But you have to understand with theatre, it's particularly important, because people can get drowned out very, very easily. So to come back to what kind of theatre that I'm interested in, or what my ideas about theatre are. Fundamentally, it's collaborative. Secondly, I want to work with artists of all disciplines. And that means that I have to give them space for their art. So I have to somehow compromise things in order to give them the space that they need, so that they don't feel overly compromised. Sound designers tend to be the people who feel most compromised, in my experience, because very often a director will go and say, I want you to use these 3 songs, I need a doorbell, 2 doors closing, and something else. And you can do your own thing with the something else. And that's not the way, in my experience, to work with anybody, but particularly not sound designers, because you're robbing yourself of a really great opportunity for an exposure to something that you never considered. Again, with designers, set designers, I used to nearly have a set drawn when I came to set designers, and there was no space for them. So if you consider yourself an artist, you have to have that respect, I believe, for the people that you're working with. And the idea of this, and that is fundamentally, for me, the essence of theatre. It's not performance art. It's not me delivering my big solo vision. For me, theatre is fundamentally a collaborative art, and has to create space for all the artists. The third thing that's, I suppose, is my idea about theatre is I'm personally very interested in myth. Now, there's loads of different styles of theatre, and there's lots of talk about whether, you know, we like naturalism, whether we like realism, whether we like post-dramatic theatre. My personal taste is I'm interested in myth. Now, one of the things that has happened to me in doing sort of these types of conversation, or giving away my thoughts, my feelings about theatre, is that words become very particular. So when I say myth, what I mean by that is I don't know, I'm sure you've all read that book, The World's a Stage. I think that's where Ronald Harwood describes myth as the language where it's the notion that it's the language where the unconscious and the conscious meet. It's the space where the unconscious and the conscious meet. and it's where we try to make sense of the forces in the world that we don't really understand. So when I talk about myth, that's kind of what I'm talking about, the space in us where conscious and the unconscious world meet, and that place that forces us to make sense of a world that is, I suppose, beyond our comprehension or beyond reason. Now, I know there are endless definitions of what myth is, but to me that works for theatre, because there's a huge value, and don't get me wrong, I make a lot of work with community groups. I make a lot of work that are based around places and around issues and responding to moments in time. But for me, it's not enough on its own. For me, it's not enough to just draw attention to a space or an idea or a notion. It's really important that it has to connect on some deeper level with what it is to be human, with what it means in the wider world. So recently, actually it's probably not that recent, 2 years ago, I worked on a play, on a piece of work that was inspired because we met a man, myself and producer Russia met a man on another project who was a boat builder, and his family had been making boats in the same area for 6 generations. And there was a quiet storytelling, natural storytelling ability with this man. He was very shy, but when he spoke, he used language in a vernacular that was completely novel to me, who grew up down the road from him. And he spoke about this relationship to being in this area for 6, 7 generations, and how his family had built boats, and that he had no daughters, and they built wooden boats by hand, and they also, did fiberglass boats, but how he had no daughters, which meant, and his brother had no daughters, had no sons rather, only daughters was the phrase that I remember, only daughters. And it meant that there was not going to be another generation of boat builders in this area. Now, the way he spoke, the fact that I was enraged by the notion that his daughters couldn't build boats, the fact that the area was local to me, and Russia, both Russia and I have a particular interest in making work in rural areas. It was something we couldn't let go. And we couldn't let it go partly because the idea of his idea of women, partly because of the value of boats in the contemporary world in terms of people coming into our country and what ports and boats mean. And because of the history and the beauty of this fabulous wooden boat that he and his family made, that was almost an artifact at this point, because its beauty had sort of outweighed its function almost. So I do believe in responding to moments or issues or ideas that are from our contemporary world, but I need to have something more in there. It wasn't enough for me to make a story about a man who made boats because I was raging that he felt his daughters couldn't make boats, which was the primary impulse. It had to tap into something else, a feeling or a sense or a connectedness to the wider world. And I'll come back to it. But that's what I mean by myth. That's my specific meaning, I suppose. And what's really interesting to me is I am definitely a believer in the fundamental idea of a Dionysian notion of surrendering to a collective experience when it comes to theatre. The notion, the origins of our theatre, the idea that there's a ritualistic element, and that the audience and the celebrants or the makers are surrendering to this experience. But I have to say that I'm definitely much more interested in the place where the audience and the celebrants have separated, if you like, because I'm really interested in theatre as an act of communal imagination. That idea I was talking to you, mentioning a minute ago, about bringing the conscious and the unconscious mind together. But that moment in Dionysian theatre, when it's separated out from being this frenzied orgy of people, kind of the idea that people were brought into this trance-like state together and kind of separated themselves from reality. I'm not interested in losing yourself to that degree, which is why I feel I need to clarify that I'm sure all of you know what I mean by Dionysian theatre. It's not that part. It's the later part where audiences had their own role, and where the idea of the celebrants is to bring the audience to the same place in our minds, in our imagination. Because another thing for me is, when I make a piece of work, I very, very clearly place the audience into the work. So that's a very important part of my idea about theatre. I don't want to talk at them. I don't want to abuse them. I don't want to pretend they're not there. And I pretend they're not there in one way, but I tend to make work that tends to support the fourth wall in general. So I may be creating what would be easily defined as naturalistic work, but I always consider where the audience are. So take something that's considered, that I made, and again, we'll come back into this with more detail, but something that I made that is considered ultra naturalistic, a play called On Raftery's Hill, which was set in a kitchen with a family. That play had 4 or 5 different points in it where while we were playing within the confines of the fourth wall, we broke it to put the audience into the story. So there are very deliberate moments where the actors looked at the audience or appealed to the audience or tried to engage with the audience as a wider community, not necessarily as the physical audience sitting there. Other times I've done things like played around the audience because I want them to feel like things are going on behind their back. There's a psychological reason, is what I'm trying to say. There's a psychological reason for things that I do within the production in terms of how it engages with an audience. Is that clear what I mean by that? Yeah, we good? Okay, good. So that element is very key to my idea about theatre. I love words is another thing that's really important to me. Now, as you know from what I've just said about Foyle Punt, which was the guy with the boat, I don't always need words, but my preference is words, particularly plays. But I also love stories and poems and conversations. So that's how something like Foyle Punt happened, because the conversation I had with that guy, the way he spoke, how he articulated himself, his ideas, I fundamentally disagreed with. They were so beautiful and they were so honest and they were so true, and they were put together, the ideas were put together in a way that created images in my mind, that I had to make that piece of work. But my preference is a text. My preference is a great play, because great plays work on the psychology in a way that other pieces of writing don't. It works on multiple levels at the same time. I never cease to be amazed at the skill that goes into great playwriting. So for me, that's kind of an essential aspect. The reason I make theatre, which I've only discovered through my attempt to articulate in words over the years, why I make theatre, and failed miserably, because the rules, every time I set up rules for myself, they fall apart. Every time I decide I want to only ever work on classic texts, I meet somebody like the guy who we did Foil Punt with. So I've discovered that I absolutely love people. My interest in theatre is human beings. Now, I know in an element, to a certain degree, all of our interest is, but I'm interested in making the kind of theatre that examines our humanity. And humanity, I mean like our human nature or human attributes, the human race. And one thing that really struck me when I can go down a rabbit hole trying to find the exact word to mean the thing that I am trying to say, and I never ever have got there in my life. But when I tried to articulate what I meant for a similar exercise to this, what I meant by humanity, I discovered that in the dictionary definition for humanity, it says benevolence, which is kind of extraordinary, that the idea that humanity is built on a desire to do good. And that's not how we often see the human nature. But if you go into every project where you are dealing with human beings and you look at it from the perspective of the desire to do good, it opens up characters for you in a way that nothing else does. I mean, again, on Raftery's Hill is a very difficult subject matter. The play is based around a family where there has been systematic sexual abuse in that family. And a lot of people couldn't, at the time when I was making it, were horrified that I was making a piece of work about a violent act on women again, because we're so sick of it. But again, I'll come into this with more detail in a little minute, but pardon me, I think that we dismiss things too easily in a kind of a binary way at the moment. It's good, it's bad, it's, right, it's wrong. People have defined Red Raftery to me from that play as a monster. And if he were a monster, that would be so easy and so easy to identify and so safe for the rest of us because we could spot them a mile away. But the reality is that they're not monsters. They're human beings with human impulses, human desires, human psychology, human needs, and a fundamental, not for every moment of their life, but a fundamental desire to do good in one way or another. They may do monstrous acts, they may do violence, they may commit murder, they may commit rape, they may commit horrendous crimes, but it's too easy to dismiss them as monsters. It's much more true to the human experience to try and engage with them as the same as yourself, the same as myself, but for some reason, this moment, they decide to commit a monstrous act. And when you approach character like that, when you approach story and plays like that, what it allows you to do is to mine our psychology and unearth emotions. And for certain types of theatre, people don't like those kind of words. But when I go and see a play, I want to be moved. I want to ideally be changed. I don't care how I'm provoked. It can be mildly or extremely. It can be an emotional provocation or intellectual, thought-provoking. But ideally, I want to have my understanding of myself and the world that I live in irrevocably changed or challenged. And that, for me, is the opportunity that comes from approaching any script, any story, any situation in theatre with a love of people and a love of humanity. So since I've discovered the benevolence in humanity, if you like, it has really been provocative for me in terms of the kind of art that I want to make. And it's particularly relevant in terms of the actors that I work with, because and this is another area of theatre where I may not be aligned with some of you, but I absolutely love acting, the art of acting, which is a complicated situation to be in at the moment with the taste and the fashion for other kinds of performance. But I'm interested in the act of acting. And when I try to clarify what that means, there's something somehow in the gap between who the performer is and who they're representing that gives a space to look at it in a way that is really exciting for me. And I suppose we might talk about that a little bit later more, but I want a brave actor who is prepared to give everything that they have in their bank of knowledge to the production. I am interested in the idea that acting, in the way that, say, I don't know, if you're between principals in a school, an acting principal is holding the space in a temporary way. I love the idea that that's what acting is. You're holding the space in a temporary way. You're trying to embody something for a temporary period of time. You're giving an expression of something. Or trying, I suppose that's it, really. Is that okay? Is that enough? You know what I mean by that? Like, do you know what I mean? As opposed to, it's not about a certain, it's not about a method actor over a Meisner actor, is what I'm trying to say. It's about engaging with the idea of holding this character, this human idea, in a temporary way, that we can all look at it from a perspective that we don't normally see. So let's look a little bit more specifically at some of the productions that I have been involved in and what the process specifically was for them. So what I thought I would do is I would look at those three I've just mentioned and share a little bit about my process with you all. I'm assuming that you're all going to, this is Chatham House Rules and all of that. Do we have an Irish version of Chatham House Rules? This is not like stuff to bring.
Mention, Catriona, we are recording. I should probably mention that we are recording this.
I know, but okay, then I will be careful. I shall take that back. Thank you for the reminder. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to scrap what I was just about to say, and I'm going to go back there. No, I'm only joking. I'm going to talk to you about on Raftery's Hill, because it's probably the biggest production that I've done in Ireland. Yeah, and it is something that I chose, which is a rare. And I will talk to you about the process and how that happened and how I found the people to work with on it. I'll talk about City Song, because that's probably the most recent thing that you may have seen. that has had a bigger cast, and what the process was with that. And I'll talk a little bit about foil punt, but just because it kind of contradicts everything that I believe about theatre, and I just want to sort of acknowledge that you can have these rules for yourself, but you have to be open to them being all wrong and broken when you meet something that's worth breaking them for, shall we say. Okay. Tanya, I sent you some documents, so at some point I might ask you to just share them.
I'm ready, fingers on the trigger.
So maybe I should open them so I know what I'm talking about, actually. So I'm going to start with On Raftery's Hill. So as I said, I pitched On Raftery's Hill to the Abbey. And I pitched it, they asked me to send them a couple of suggestions, and I sent them that one. And I sent it because I've been sending that to theatres, I would say for 6-7 years before then, and nobody would let me do it because they thought it was too dark. And we did have a question mark over it at the time because the world is not really interested in seeing young women being brutalized at the moment. So, but I was very, very clear that it was important for me to do this piece of work at the time, particularly when it happened, because we were just before the abortion referendum. We were in a place where Waking the Feminists had happened. We had to acknowledge that women were categorically being cut out of the conversation. And also a lot of the Me Too movement was happening, and a lot of people were being exposed for their abuse of power, using sex as a weapon to get young actresses and vulnerable women to, I suppose, hide. I was really interested in the idea of how women, and we've all done it at some point, hide what is happening because of not wanting to look like, not wanting to look oversensitive, or wanting to be cool, or not wanting people to know that they were put themselves in that position. And I'm really interested in how women self-curate, if you know what I mean by that, violence that happens to them. And not just women, but I suppose I have a natural leaning in that regard. So that was partly why, and that was, I suppose, mainly why I wanted to do On Raftery's Hill. So they asked me to come up with a document to explain to them so that they could share it at senior management. And that document I'm going to share with you now. Now, all of this, Tanya, it's called On Raftery's Hill there. This document that I'm going to share with you is, maybe we'll go to the, So this first page here, So this first page here is kind of my response to the world and what I kind of wanted the texture to look like. For me, there's 2 hares shot in the opening scene of the play, and I was really interested in the hare as a kind of its association with women in Irish mythology and with shape-shifting. So the hare became very early on, became central to my thinking around this play. I knew I wanted it to be a watery world because it was something that I really was interested in, the idea of sinking. I mean, I'm aware I'm talking now in a kind of abstract way for people who don't know the play, but bear with me a little bit, and by the time, and you can ask me clarification questions later. I knew I wanted it to be a familiar world, There's a kitchen down here, but at the bottom, but I didn't want it to be, you know, the typical old Irish 1950s kitchen sink look. Hares make kind of nests in long grass. Like there's a picture here on the right of the screen. They don't burrow holes like rabbits. I was really intrigued by the idea that the hares kind of are exposed, or that you can see into these nests. That became very central to the production. The idea of being waterlogged, where there's no air, where things don't grow properly, became very key. So this was my sort of aesthetic approach to the world, having, you know, known the play for a while. Can we go on to the next page a bit? Yeah. Okay. So we'll forget the images for the moment, but I created this document which explains the tone and the world of the play in words as well as pictures. I will always work in images and text because sometimes I'm not very good. I'm certainly no writer. I'm not very good at explaining what I mean. These images here are images that I use to explain to them the kind of design I wanted. So the kind of elements I wanted the designers to apply to the world of the previous page, if you like. So this page you're looking at, it has a texture in it. You can see that there's like light and shade a lot in it, and that elements are lit really well and then other elements are not. But if you look anywhere in these spaces, you can see everything almost in some capacity. You can see through it and past the structures. So that became a sort of version of a designed version of the world that I kind of wanted to look at. And then go down a little bit more to the text. Yeah, so the document that I sent, I kind of broke down the idea of what the play is about, the reasons that I personally wanted to direct it, the tone of the piece. So for me, this gives you, when you talk about tone, I think it's really useful for artistic documents, because if you look at this line here, the piece sits somewhere between the beauty of the violin music and the humor of the piece. Now, that seems a very strange thing to say about a play that is about violence, but the violin has pain in it, in the music, as it's written. It's very beautiful, it's very skillful, and it's painful. And the humor in the piece, because there's a line in the play. Is it in this document? Can you go down a bit further for me a second? We might come back. Maybe it's not there. Is it? Yeah, stop there. So there is a line in the play which is, I can't imagine anyone wanting to do anything to Philomena. We can go back up now, Tanya. So the main character is called Red Raftery, and his best friend in the play, who is kind of aware of what's going on in the family, is called Isaac. And Red and Isaac is talking about his daughter. And Red says that line to Isaac about Isaac's daughter. And this happens in the second half of the play. And it's very funny. My casting was, I wanted to cast somebody who could get a laugh on that line, which was a bit of an achievement. But for me, the play is about how we accommodate violence in our society. And we accommodate it by almost pretending it didn't happen. And there was a story that I had heard when I was growing up about a girl at home, and her mother had effectively prostituted her out to fishermen. And there was a big, huge court case, and loads of men, any man who had given her a lift up and down the road was taken to court. So a busload of men was taken to court. And one of them who was a fisherman, was charged for taking indecent photographs of this young girl, and he was jailed for 2 years. And he came home, and he went into a Gaelic meeting after he came out of jail. And my dad was at the meeting, and he described what happened, which was some guy, as he came in the door, some guy said really loudly, "Look, the photographer of the century is returned," and everybody laughed. And to me, that's rural Ireland in a nutshell. And to me, that is how we accommodate very negative behavior in our society. And immediately he was back in our little town. So that to me was the key, that to be able to achieve that in an audience, because you laugh in a moment and then you are aware that you've laughed and you know you shouldn't have laughed. And if we could achieve that, then we would achieve the play. And then the play would have something, would make a point, you know, and it makes a point because we do those things and we acknowledge them. And this is what I was trying to say earlier about that place where the unconscious and the conscious meet. That kind of thing would drive me to do something like that. So I was adamant that I wanted to cast a person that was like your dad's best friend. He would be, you know, good crack down the golf club. He'd be the person everyone would want to have a drink with. He would be fun, and he could get a laugh in the second half of the play after we had seen him commit a violent act on his own daughter in the first half. So that is why the tone tries to unlock that. That's what I mean by the tone. And it's very, you know, it's very hard to describe it, and it's certainly very hard to say that's what you're going to do before you do it. I'm delighted to say we did it. Delighted and horrified, but you know, you build, it's the steps that you put in if you know you want to achieve something like that. And then the world, the Petri dish idea of examining something. So there was several places in the play where I put in points where the audience were acknowledged. The first place was I put a hunt into the opening of the play. And this is another thing around casting. So that was my reason for casting Red Raftery, Lorcan Cranach as Red Raftery, and I think he did a great job. I'm going to talk now about the girl in it and my choices around casting her. And I'm going to talk about this because for me this is quite difficult to articulate. And this is why I was saying Chatham House rules, but it's very hard to articulate. I needed to cast a girl who was physically comfortable because I knew that I needed her to be naked in this play. Now, that's a very hard decision to make objectively, because how is that not gratuitous? And I knew that I needed her to be naked on her own terms for herself. I knew I needed her to do it, and that it wouldn't happen during the rape. And I needed this to happen because I built the play around the hair that I said at the beginning. And the hair washes itself in pools of water and washes off dirt and washes off like scrubs at itself quite violently. And so to make this parallel with the hairs and with this young girl and the transition and the shapes shifting and all of these things that were unconscious things that I wanted to put in the head of the audience, I felt I needed her to be naked, which was a really hard decision to make. But I also knew I would never force her to do it. But she didn't know that. Obviously, and force is the wrong word in the context, but this is what I mean about words. I would never, once I had cast it, I knew it would be a conversation, but I made it an issue in the casting so that the actress would be aware. And this again is why I have utter respect for my collaborators, and I'm not going to spring something on someone. I knew I needed this to happen to realize what I wanted with the production, but I also knew that fundamentally it would always be a conversation. But this was a new actress still in drama school that I cast in this part. So I also knew that the balance of power was off, but it's my responsibility. So as much as I tried to eliminate the hierarchy, she was coming out of drama school. So how we achieved that is we found a series of exercises that she would be incredibly confident in and good at for the physical element of the work. So that meant that when we did the physical elements in the morning or as part of the day of rehearsal, she and the younger members of the company were much better at them, and they could help the older and less physical members and people who were resistant psychologically to the idea of doing physical work. They could help them and show them what to do, which meant that at different times of the day, different people in the room were better, if you like, and I don't like those absolute words, but were leading or were more successfully achieving or utilizing the techniques that we were using. So what that meant was I was able to, she led the physical, she was dominant, shall we say, in the physical aspects of the work, which meant that when we came to choreograph the violent act, I was able to use what I'd seen her teach Lorcan in the physical aspect and adapt it into the assault. Like I had known that because I was drawing this parallel with the hairs, and because the opening scene begins with him coming in and throwing hairs on the table and skinning them, I knew I wanted to parallel the assault with that act, because I believed that the character's ownership of his household was the same. Those hairs were on his land, he owned them. His daughter's in his house, he owned her. So there was a parallel psychology in his behavior, and I don't know, like, does that make sense what I'm saying? That's kind of what I was trying to achieve. So finding somebody so you can imagine how challenging it was to broach the subject of saying to young actresses coming into a casting session, for this particular play, that I need you to be prepared to be naked. It's very important that you have enough respect for everybody that's coming into your room to allow them to make those choices for themselves in advance. And then can we go back down to the bottom? Yeah. And this last little bit, this sort of was really important to me for this particular story, as someone who grew up in rural Ireland and has a strong connection with it, that this did not feel like an alien world. It couldn't feel to me like something unfamiliar. I wanted the kitchen, the space, the world of this play to feel like you could walk into it in any house anywhere in Ireland. It had to feel familiar, and it had to feel contemporary and not like a period piece. Because with these kind of stories, it's too easy to dismiss it as, oh, that happens over there, that happens down there, that would never happen here. That happens here, I can tell you. That absolutely happens everywhere. And I also have to say, I get hugely self-conscious talking about this, because I have no personal experience of it, but I do have a friend who had this experience, or not exactly this, but a similar experience. But when you start to talk about this world, I suddenly become very self-conscious on behalf of my family that I'm saying something that's not true, in my effort to explain that I think it is far more common, familiar, and widespread than many of us think. I think it's a massively important issue that we need to explore and expose and talk about. And to me, it's one of the last taboos, this idea of this kind of abuse within families. And that is why something like this is a hugely important play to do, and why the collaborators that you choose have to be aligned with your idea of what theatre is. Otherwise, somebody's going to be feeling exposed, taken advantage of, and a whole kind of, any number of other horrible situations. So I chose this very particularly because it's very, very important that people want to talk about those huge, horrible, dark subjects, and also present them not just as monstrous, horrible, easy to dismiss places. That you find collaborators that are prepared to go with you and say, this could be happening 2 doors down the road and we would not know. So that is why I cannot stress enough how important it is that you have the right collaborators. And then we'll just go down to the last page. And in the end, this is where we ended up with our production. So while maybe the kitchen isn't particularly that familiar in that, or cozy looking in that particular photo, when it was lit in a certain way, at the beginning of the play, it looked much more simple and much more contained, and you couldn't see through the cupboards quite as much, and you couldn't see the projections, and the color wasn't quite so dirty. So we lit it in a way that made it feel a little bit more familiar. But every single person on that production, for the first time in my life, was on the same page, going in the same direction. I've never had a better group of collaborators in my life than I had in that production. And that meant that we never laughed. I have never laughed as much in rehearsals in my life. And we all feel we achieved what we wanted to artistically with that production. So that's the payoff when you do find the right collaborators. Okay, we'll just go. So that's an example of something where you have most control. I was able to choose my designers within reason. Several people weren't available, and some people were, second or third choices, which ended up being the absolute perfect choice. I mean, that's the kind of gift that you get. I ended up with better than what I ever imagined. I didn't know this designer particularly well. Well, I knew her, but we hadn't worked together. And it's only because a couple of Irish, I'm sure Joanna, she knows this, so she won't mind me saying it, a couple of Irish designers weren't available. But she was 100% the right person for the job, and a gift of a collaborator. I can't wait to work with her again, for example. So even though things didn't go exactly, I didn't get all my wish list, I got better than my wish list. But the only thing, there was a decent budget. I chose the play, I chose the collaborators. Gift. Now we'll go to City Song, slightly different situation. Is this okay? Would people rather I talked about I can't even see. Am I talking, Tanya, are we good? Or should I change tack? Are you happy?
This is fantastic. The only thing I'd say is just, I'd love us to leave like at least maybe half an hour, 40 minutes for questions at the end.
And how long have I got to make that happen?
20 minutes.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
I have less to say. You know that on Cells is like my favorite subject. Okay. So City Song was different. So City Song, I was asked to direct it, and when I was asked to direct it, I was told that I was limited to, so I read it first and I responded to it. And my first response was, can you go to the first picture there? Oh no, is that the first picture? Okay, not the first picture. Anyway, oh, it's the casting thing. Never mind. My first response was, this is I'm putting a city on stage. I need to do it with a huge number of people. We should cast a choir, and we should make a big sort of choral event of this piece, because it was a stunning piece of poetry, basically. It was a play, but it was a poem as well. Slightly following the idea of Under Milk Wood, but definitely more of an epic poem. So I built a whole lot of ideas around the kind of sound we would use and how we would. I don't know if you ever saw. Did you see the ads where you'd have a choir and they were making like a car sound? Do you know those ads? Yeah, that's where I was going with this. I was thinking we'll create the whole world with the people, because basically a city is its people, was what I was thinking. Then I was told I had quite a limited budget and I was only allowed 6 actors. So then you're into complicated territory, because how do you put a city on stage? And how do you choose with 6 actors? And how do you choose what to leave out? And that was very difficult. And also there was 56 or 7, 83 characters in the play. So, and the body of the play was spoken by a single voice, and then there was 83 characters that had maybe 1-2 lines each in it as written. So, so the solution we had, so what I knew I needed on this one, I needed an Irish designer who would understand Dublin. Didn't have to be Dublin, but love Dublin. That's what I knew I wanted for the set design. And I ended up working with Sarah Bacon, who I'd worked with before. It was a gift of a collaboration. Casting wise was not so easy. So what we decided to do was we decided to see everybody who wanted to be seen for the play, which meant we auditioned in Dublin and in London, and I think we saw over 400 people in the end. Because it was the only way. I thought, and Maureen Hughes, fair play to her, who was the casting director, we thought it was the only way to be fair. So we saw everybody that wanted to be. Now, since then, people have said to me, I wanted to be seen and I wasn't seen. Well, I didn't know that. Either your agent or you didn't tell me. But we put it on the website and we told all the agents we would see anyone who wanted to be seen. So that I can only allow for that. As the auditions moved forward, I became acutely aware that there were 3 generations of family in it. I could either cast a family, or I could cast a very narrow slice of something that was a version of Dublin. But I couldn't have both, because if I had both, I would eliminate any dynamics, if you know what I mean. So it came down to, did I think it was more important to have a kind of European diverse city or a family structure? And we went down to callbacks with both versions. And in the end, Dylan, who's the writer, and I haven't talked about collaborating with writers in this, but writers on their in my view, first version of a writer's play, you have to work very closely with them, and they have to be involved in all your decision. And I leave an open invitation to any living writer, or dead, mind you, to be in the room as much as they want when we're working on their script. I won't always defer to them, but they should always be there. So Dylan was very open to whichever version I wanted to go with. We ended up going with, I felt Dylan's Dublin is young and energetic. And he had written and performed spoken word himself, so there's an energy in it. So for me, it was key that that we would cast a company of 6 that was effectively young, energetic, diverse, and could represent a European city. Which meant they had to play all ages, which meant they had to be physically dynamic, and it meant that they had to have a capacity for language, because Dylan wrote very, very, very complicated text. Tanya, can you go down to that one sentence that I put in this somewhere first, and we can come back? Or maybe that's in the other one as well. Sorry, can you go to the other city song slide? So yeah, that was what I wanted it to look like, that first picture, and it didn't. It looked more like that. Go up one again. Sorry, go down. Yeah, down and up. Yeah. No, where is it? Is it not there? It's not there. Sorry, Tanya. Anyway, there is a sentence. No, it's not there. That's what it ended up looking like. But there's one sentence in the text, and all the sentences were very long, very, very complicated. And I needed performers who could deliver the sentence with a little bit of magic, is the only way I can describe it, to make sense of it, to put space in it, to let it, and for it to feel like it was their words. And it's a moment like in the second half of the play that talks about the rain coming in, and how it's always raining in Dublin, and and there's a line in it about staining pale denim navy, and it was so beautiful, and it did that thing that Dylan had said was important for the performers, that they were able to play a character in a line. So that's what we tried to do. We tried to get actors who would be comfortable to present, to be comfortable to emotionally connect with the character in one line. There it is. There are dead hours here when it rains. That's it. As it always does, heavy enough to navy pale denim and puddles, so that everything is wavily double imaged underfoot. A billion angled, mangled reflection, a studiously livid cubist study in perspective, set to the million mutter of gutter gush, the rushing whoosh of cartwheels rilling, the percussion or trilling of concrete and tarmac lacquered with liquid pelted until it sings, puckering in concentric rings in Ouroboros palimpsest. Now, he does spoken word, and Dublin Old School and that style of work is done very effectively by people who are not me. You can tell by the way that I read it that that is not my world, and I would have no capacity to present something in that way. So what we needed was people who could make those lines character, and that particular piece was the voice. And so the two challenges were, how do we cast the voice of Dublin? Because is it an older character with years of experience, or is it young, dynamic, fresh, new Dubliner? So we ended up casting 3 voices because we couldn't achieve Dublin in one. Because she's female as well, and Olivia, Dublin is female, but I didn't think that did justice to the sounds and to Dylan's voice. So after we had done these mammoth auditions and callbacks, we ended up with actors that could both master an entire text of this kind of language and do it in a way that didn't make it spoken word devoid of character, if you know what I mean. Because there's a real masterful quality to people who actually do spoken word performance, and they and their text can be the character. But to put a style on 6 people and not do a bad version of Dublin Old School was beyond me. So someone else can do that in the future, but it was beyond me. We brought in lots of people who were spoken word artists, and in the end, because my philosophy of theatre is more aligned to humanity, I could only get people who I felt were hitting a rhythm of the line and no connection to the humanity within the imagery that Dylan was writing. And that's my taste and not everybody's taste. Very particular set of circumstances, this one, because he also had written part of it for an actor and had done a workshop of it with actors, and those people ultimately didn't end up in the production. And that was a really difficult decision to make. But that was, again, because if I was going to be working with people, I needed to be able to connect with people with their work on a way where my work had some input. We tried very hard with a whole series. We spent 2 weeks trying to find a verbal quality that spoke to that choral idea that I was talking about, and we had to give it up in the end because it just didn't work. So we ended up with a tiny, narrow slice of young Dublin, and hopefully we managed to achieve as much as we could from the rest of the world with that. So again, the casting for this was kind of an odd experience. But we ended up with a great company who worked together to create a whole load of energies and ages, and for me achieved something really quite magical with that. I'm aware now I'm rushing a little bit, and they've talked anyway. So that line there made me say yes to the play, and that line was used in auditions to find people that could speak it. And then those images that we had up a second ago of the mirror, we ended up with a mirror because the only way I could do justice to Dublin was by casting the audience into the production. So we actively went for, so I'm skipping all of that. We actively went for a mirror that was also a map of Dublin, so that the audience would literally be in the play and we would see them in the play. When I was approaching how to work on this text, yeah, there it is. Sarah Bacon's gorgeous set with minimal furniture and very minimal costumes, so that they could be multiple ages and multiple characters. But yeah, I'll not go down that road. Anyway, when I was working on this play, because I love poetry and because I immediately responded to it on the Louis MacNeice poem about Dublin and parallels between the two worlds and Under Milkwood, which it was kind of based on, poetry and rhythm and the movement became essential. So we needed, one of the things that I was really sorry about was I worked to try and find people with mixed ability for this. But the speed in which first of all, we didn't have many people audition with different levels of ability. But for me, it would have been really important for this play because it's a city. But it was partly why we ended up narrowing down the casting so much to within, I think, about 10 years of age. So we went young. Young was the thing that we went for, young and energetic. So we cast people that had very, very high energy and very strong verbal dexterity. But the narrower we went, the more we lost. And that's important to notice when you're making something like this. You have to be very aware of what you're leaving out and make it a decision and not an accident. So yeah, that, and then the other one that I spoke to you about, which we'll just very quickly look at, was foil punt. And foil punt, the collaborators on that were nearly all there. So this one, the script was given to me, and this last one, Russia and I had met the boat builder through just in Donegal. We were working on another project, and Russia, who is the artistic director of the local group, she engaged Little John Nee and Liam Bell. We had done another project before. So when I was approached, they were already in place. So then I had to make a decision about whether these people were the right collaborators for me. I had worked with them both before, and I knew they were. I have made a rule that I don't do pre-cast work anymore unless I've already worked with the actors in some capacity, because it's too complicated for me. So, and the same with designers. If something is pre-set, it's very difficult to know if you're the right person to fit in when you're the director. Other things it's easier, but when you're the director, it's hard to know, because at the end of the day, you have to be the one driving the final edit, is how I would put it. But this was unique in that regard. And the only performer we cast in this production was Farah El. And that was because Farah El is the singer in one of the pictures, I think. Tanya, if you go down a bit. Oh, and Jenny Moran was already cast. She is a chef and an artist. So we wanted Farah El because she's a Libyan singer, and because we were looking at what the relationship or current relationship to something like this boat wasn't built by them, as a beautiful thing, but has it become now a piece of art or like a museum piece? And how do we have a conversation around his sadness at the loss of his family's ability to build this boat, his relationship to women, and the fact that they save lives in most of Europe at the moment. And Farah El works very closely with people who are seeking asylum in Ireland. So we created a number of songs that drew parallels between his loss and their loss, and his sadness at losing a boat and their need for a boat. So so again, this is an example of where the idea on its own isn't enough. For me, it had to speak to who we are today and what our world is doing today. And again, that's I suppose that's it in a nutshell, why I wanted to end with that it's not enough to have, for me, and all of this is totally specific to me, it's not enough for me to have just one really, one good idea. If it doesn't connect into some kind of conversation about our humanity and how we function in the world. And if at the end of all that, and we come back to the first question, do you want to work with me? If the answer is yes, then you know how. I hope that's all useful, and I'm open to any questions. Stick on your microphones, or what way will we do this?
What I'd suggest is, we've worked this before. That was brilliant, Catriona. Thank you so much. And I know it's exhausting to kind of speak to a screen for an hour and a half. So thank you so much for such a rich insight into your work. The way I'm going to suggest you work it for questions is there's a hands up function in Zoom. So we're going to start with students from the TU Dublin Conservatoire, current students. So if anyone's got a question, if you want to use the hands up function, or just if you're like myself, not able to figure it out on Zoom, just write hands up into the group chat. And what I'll do is I'll call on people by name and ask them to switch off their microphone and ask their question, switch on their microphone and ask their question. So do we have any questions from the room?
No.
Well, while people are thinking questions, why don't I start with one? You've talked beautifully about kind of the process in terms of thinking of auditions, how to figure out when you want to work with people, some of the things that you go through in rehearsals. Given that so much of theatre is social as well as professional, there can be quite a great bleed between kind of work happens in the rehearsal room and then, you know, you go home or you go to the pub afterwards, and there can be a bleed between those things. How have you found the best way to approach having a social side to your professional life with actors?
That actually is really tricky. And I have some actors who are good friends. And before I came, I suppose I've been working fairly consistently here for about 4 years. But before that, most of my work was either in America or London, and I had a rule that I did not socialise with the actors when we were in production. And that was very deliberate, because I feel like no matter how good the relationship is, the actors need to be able to go, what the fuck was she talking about? Or she told me this and then she changed her mind yesterday and told me that, because that happens. And you need to be able to let off steam and, you know, with each other. And that's very important, to be able to do that without me. And also, if I am out and we're drinking and you come in tomorrow and you're doing a lazy job, I can't cope. I just can't cope with it.
That's honest.
It is, you know, any kind, you know, I know myself well enough to know that I find that very challenging. If I haven't been out and I'm not sure why, and I think you're tired, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But if I know you crawled home at 4 a.m. and then you come, it will affect my relationship. Also, I need to be able to give notes in the room that are sometimes very difficult, and people find that very difficult, or find it difficult if we've been very friendly or we've had a really intimate conversation the night before. So all of that is challenging. Since I came to Ireland, actors, I was sat down by a company very early on and told and reprimanded for never going to the pub with them, and they felt that it was kind of snobby, and I felt that it actually defeated my idea that I don't want to be hierarchical. So I ended up going with them and was raging and, you know, pissed off, and bought them alcohol and sat there with my arms folded drinking water in protest. But now I've calmed down and I managed to be a lot more balanced. But the reason I said the first bit is it is important. It is an important space to keep when you're in production.
I love the image of you buying like an angry round of pints for everyone.
You know, 2. I bought 2 to make a point, and then sat there with my arms folded in a rage.
That's a brilliant image. All right. We're not seeing any questions from current students, but we have a few questions from graduates and other people, so I think we'll just throw it open. I can see a question from JC, and his question, JC, would you like to turn on your microphone, or shall I ask a question for you? I'm going to assume that awkward pause means I should just... Okay, great. Thanks, JC. All right, JC asks, what are your opinions on ensemble?
Generally, I mean, City Song, I would say, was an ensemble. I love I love an ensemble. I think that it's something that we actually in this part of the world do very well. I've worked in America and other places where it's more challenging. I mean, to me, it speaks very, I believe a theatre company is an ensemble. So I find the question a little bit difficult to answer, because I think you mean in a more traditional sense, like a chorus. Is that right? Is it? And I like it very much, but not if the individuals within the ensemble are leaning too heavy on the idea of a group, if you know what I mean. I like an ensemble that keeps the individuality in the structure of a group, so that you get some variation in tone and character. And I find sometimes that, like, I love a really rich ensemble that's physically a kind of physical theatre ensemble that surprises you with shapes and creates a whole world just from the bodies of the people that make it. But I think that there's very often there can be a kind of halfway house, and I'm less interested in that personally.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, I can see, and thank you for your question, JC. And JC says, thank you so much. All right, I can see a few graduates with their metaphorical hands up. Kevin McMahon, do you want to switch on your camera and ask us your question?
Hey, Catriona.
Hi.
So one of the things, the talk was really, really so interesting. One of the things that really stood out to me was your kind of real interest in people. And you said how you like to sort of examine our humanity. And so I was just wondering, how would you kind of like to see actors embody that sentiment when they're stepping into a rehearsal room?
I would like you to come into the rehearsal room having thought very much about your character in the context of your experience of life and the play. But I don't want you to have any decisions. I want you to have options that you're interested in playing with. But I don't want you to have idle options. I want you to have options grounded in the text. So after we do the sort of line by line read through, we'll break it up into little sections, a roadmap for everybody, which is effectively, a shift in the text that affects everybody in the room. So once we do that, I do that so that we're all in the same play. We're all doing the same play. So we all know that, like, for every entrance and exit, there's a shift. That's the easy one. But something that affects everybody in the play. So what I would want you then to do as an individual actor is I want you to have a range of options for how you will use that shift, that roadmap. And when we are rehearsing, I want you to try different things. I don't want you to learn the lines. I think if you don't know why you're saying something, I'm not interested in you saying it. So I ask people not to learn the lines until they know who they are and why they're speaking. But I expect you to learn the lines, once you do. So in the fantasy version, when you're doing a production in the Abbey, you've 6 weeks. By the end of week 4, you would need to be learning your lines. You'd need a good substantial knowledge of your lines. There's a tricky area where your personal history and experience, the details of it are not anyone's business, and they're not necessarily the right thing to bring up in rehearsal, but they can be, but they don't necessarily have to be. What I'm saying is you shouldn't feel the need to bring something up out of pressure, but the impact and the feeling and the emotion and the experience around the issue is useful and is effective and is important to explore in rehearsal. So I would also expect that, you know, there would be a openness and also a self-protection of your own sort of personal situation, which I think comes under that area of humanity in the rehearsal room. I find, like, I do the roadmap that I just spoke about because I feel we need, rather than everyone going off and doing an individual back history, we need to answer the same questions and have the same answers as a company. Otherwise, we're in different places. So in the process of developing a back history as a company, sometimes things come up and we share things that we have experience of, and that's fine, but it should always be in the control of the actor. No one should ever feel pressure, and it should never ever be brought up outside of the room, and you should never bring up anyone else's outside of the room, and those kind of things I would try and manage. That's a gift. To share something is a gift to the company, and it's given us all food for thought. Therefore, it should never be brought up. But it's our tools or life experience and our curiosity about the experiences we haven't had yet, or hopefully sometimes we'll never have, or interest in the impact of situations and events on ourselves. They're our tools as theatre makers. And that's, you know, we are temporarily holding those things, whether we have a relationship to them or not, for the process, for the objective of exploring humanity with an audience. Does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, that was a smashing answer. Thanks a million.
Okay.
That was an excellent question too. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
All right, the next person with their hand up in the chat is our graduate, Grace Collender. So Grace, you want to stick your microphone on?
Can I be heard?
You can be heard.
Hi, Catriona. I suppose, just to echo what everyone else is saying, thank you so much for such an insightful chat. I suppose I was just wondering, would there be, to you, have you noticed any common characteristics in actors that you choose to work with, or even in terms of an audition, like a common characteristics of people who you would cast, like what they would bring that you would consider to be like a good audition, or maybe not even in terms of an audition, just in terms of like actors that you choose to work with, if there's any common characteristics there that you've noticed. If not, grand, but just I suppose.
Yeah, I think there is. I think there is actually. So I tend to, so primarily I'm interested in an emotional depth. An emotional depth as opposed to any kind of sentimentality. And that's the tricky thing. So I really like people that are free and connect to what's under the line. And however, I don't like necessarily someone to, and this is really hard to get the balance, and I'm aware of the contradiction, so I apologize. But I don't like someone who indulges the line. I notice that I like people who make interesting emotional choices. So if something is sad, and now I'm using broad strokes here, if something is sad and they go hard or funny or something else that opens up the text in a way that I hadn't thought of before, or gives me a possibility that they're not going to, shows me the possibility that they're not going to make the most obvious choices, then I'll go for that. I love that. I love somebody finding but a really authentic reason for going against sentimentality in favor of emotional truth. I know that. I know. I can hear myself. I'm thinking, what a asshole.
No.
I'm trying to think. There was. I wonder if I could find it. Hang on. There was a Dan who did City Song. What bit was it? When we did City Song, the guy who we cast, Dan Monaghan, an actor, he came in and he was, in my mind, cast on one line in his first audition. I wonder if I can remember what it was. I know it was a boy. He was playing the young boy. And he was cast on that because he played the teenage boy, the 14-year-old boy. He exposed something of himself doing it, his own 14-year-old self, if you know what I mean. He didn't play the part that he performed in the audition in the final show, but he exposed something really, really like cheeky on this line that took kind of self-consciousness out of it. The easy way to play the line was to feel sorry for yourself, because it was a shy, awkward moment. A guy at a party outside reading his phone and trying to pretend that he was fine when he was really cripplingly self-conscious. And in general, people went for the cripplingly self-conscious, whereas he went for real bravado. So he was showing me what he was doing, but he didn't demonstrate it either. He was playing cool and not sentimental and not playing self-conscious. And that's why he got the part, and that's very close to what I generally go for. Lorcan Cranich, when he read Raftery for me, he played him really charming, nice. Mae Fitzgerald, when she played the character in On Raftery's Hill, which was a kind of downtrodden daughter, played her hard and cold, and this is very key, which really threw me, sexy. She went for it. And it was like, oh, because you forget that she had, like, you kind of, in the abuse, you forget that she has her own psychology, life, young woman's desires and wants as well. So all of them were very true to the text. All of them were very emotionally and psychologically deep, but none of them were the obvious go-to. Does that answer it better?
It very much does. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. I can see from the chat that we have questions from 2 graduates and 1 current student, and I think that'll perfectly bring us to the end of the masterclass, so I'm going to cap it at that. Let's start with our current student, Owen McAdam. Welcome back. If you want to turn on your microphone and ask your question.
You can go to the people who ask questions first. I don't mind.
You're very polite. You've got your microphone on. Why don't you ask your question? We've got time for the other 2 after this.
Cool. It's just something you said earlier about like having rules for yourself but always breaking them. Do you think it's important, like working in the theatre, to know if there's like a genre or a style of something that you won't go near, or something that would kind of turn you off a particular play, if you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm expressing myself quite correctly, but
yeah, I do know what you mean. I think it's important to I think it is important to be aware that me, Tanya.
Sorry. That was a complete accidental mute, by the way. I'm not trying to censor our masterclass leader.
Nice. Unfortunately, my sign language is not up to speed. Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
I am. Okay. I think it's important to know there are things that you are not interested in, and there are things that maybe is not your skill set. But I think that you should always find an opportunity to explore them if you want. So maybe not necessarily in a final production. Maybe do a workshop first, or if you've got an audition, maybe try and find some people to sort of explore with. Like masks is my thing that I love the idea of, but never like them when I'm in the room with them. You know what I mean? Puppets and masks. Because I think they're incredibly skilled areas, and so I would be nervous to do something, but you know, recently somebody asked me would I direct something that was like a Magnus style thing, and I was like, oh, totally. You know, so I'm saying that there's a whole load of things that feel they're not the right thing for you, and that will happen, but you should definitely find a way to test the water and not dismiss anything. The other thing is you can bring your approach to something that's very far away from you, and that can kind of be very interesting sometimes. So as long as you're being treated with respect as an artist and you're not being expected to fit into someone else's idea, then yeah, it could be really interesting how you approach how you would approach something that you would tend to stay away from. If you really don't like the form, though, if you hate puppets, don't do a puppet show. I don't hate them, I'm just terrified of them. I love them, actually. One of the best shows I ever saw had puppets, but how they did it is beyond me.
That answer your question okay, Owen?
Perfectly, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, the next hand that I saw up was Alex Bailey. Alex Bailey, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question. I promise not to mute our masterclass leader this time.
Hi, thanks so much, Catriona. That was so interesting. I loved hearing you talk about your work. I was really interested in what you said about the collaborative work environment that you set up. I personally find that really constructive, and I sometimes feel that, you know, if another director favors a different approach, it can almost feel as though you're kind of overstepping when you have a creative difference or have a question, or would maybe, you know, consider taking a different approach to a character or a direction. How would you negotiate those kind of, you know, differences in vision or anything? Because ultimately, I mean, it is, of course, the director who's putting together the show, but would you try and, you know, negotiate and try and find a way of combining different visions, or would you consider it more, you know, a better use of time to just go forward with your own vision?
No, I don't think it's a good idea to go forward with your own vision. I mean, it's a tricky one. It's really tricky. My absolute terror is, and I have been here, so it's the only reason I know it exists, is when you have an actor and you don't meet in the same idea, and they go, well, I'll just do, once I'm in front of an audience, I'll do my thing anyway. That is a scary situation. Mm-hmm. And let's be honest, sometimes you have to do, there's a version of that has to happen. Sometimes, you know, the structure doesn't work. Sometimes people are out of their depth, and sometimes a person with the more experience has to drive and, you know, and those things happen. But for me, if you're a performer and you're noticing that there is a clash, I would be inclined to ask to have a conversation with the director and see if you can resolve it, and explain what your thinking is and where it's coming from, and maybe do it in private, because you know, sometimes too, as a director, you're hideously self-conscious. You're trying to, you know, pull these things, bring everyone with you. You articulate things badly. I certainly do it all the time. The actors will tell you they don't know what I'm saying half the time. I have to say everything 3 different ways. And sometimes it's embarrassing. Sometimes someone asks you a question and you're like, oh God, I'm not sure. And then you find yourself answering without thinking, well, hopefully I don't do that anymore, but I've definitely been there. So I think you have to, it's again where the humanity comes in. You have to understand you're dealing with another person with all the insecurity that you're dealing with, or anyone else's, and they happen to be the director. So if you approach them in private, you're going to be way more successful than if you kind of slightly humiliate them in front of a cast. And it depends on what stage in their career they are. Now, I have a situation where I've done several workshops with an actor who I like very much. I like their philosophy. I like how hard they work. I like their end product. I've never cast them in the production because their primary instinct is to say no every time. They just say no. I don't even think they know they're doing it. And I don't know how to have a conversation with them, but they resist everything, which means it takes quite a long time. And they question everything in not a helpful way. But I haven't given up on the possibility of working with them, but I find their approach quite aggressive and dismissive of other performers. And they're at a point where now they've been doing it long enough to know better. But it's about how they articulate their difference of opinion is the issue there. Mm-hmm. So I think it's tone and it's timing. And you can see if a director's stressed and trying to solve a problem and then coming up with, you know, as people often do, well, I totally disagree with that because da, da, da. And they might be focusing on this and you're drawing their attention to that and they can't even think. So timing and private. Does that answer you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I think that's a good answer for the rehearsal room and for life.
Yeah.
Timing and tact and tone. All right, we have one more hand up in the room, which is one of our graduates, Eleanor Walsh, if you want to stick on your microphone and ask your question of Catriona.
Okay, thank you so much, Tanya, and thank you so much, Catriona, for your time and generosity in sharing your insights. So my question is around, well, the theatres are shut, and you know, and as a community, we're all wondering about the changes that might need to be put in place so we can make and enjoy theatre safely. But there's also perhaps an opportunity to start over in some respects and introduce maybe new things or bring things that were already there to the forefront or whatever. And I was wondering what, if any, changes would you like to see in how we make theatre as creatives and how we see theatre as audiences when we open up theatres again, very gradually?
That's a great and really challenging question.
You don't have to answer.
No, maybe I won't. No.
Okay, thanks.
No, I'm only joking. Okay. At its base, in its base form, I love theatre as it is. I think that it's really important that we gather together. I think that it's really important that we gather together and discuss important issues in that form, present two sides of a story in that form, leave an audience a space where they can side with somebody or disagree with somebody. I think absolutely our theatres need to be more inclusive and more diverse, I suppose. But it's fundamental. The fundamental premise of sitting in a space together in the dark, exploring who we are, where we are in the world, and why we're here, I don't want to see change. I can't help but be intrigued at the idea of what is the piece of work, what is the question that I would be prepared to run out now and sit in the middle of 400 people without a mask to see. And I know that's not a helpful reaction by any stretch, but that's kind of what I keep thinking. What do I have to see so much that I would risk my life potentially? And I think to me, that's the interesting question at the end, because theatres have been around for so long. Our need for story is fundamental to being a human being. The digital format is certainly interesting, but it's not the same as breathing the same air. And it's really interesting that we're in a place where it is now a literal danger to breathe the same air and inhabit the same space. But, you know, theatre, and again, it's back to the Dionysian notion that theatre is anarchic. Theatre is there to society. And cheekers, I don't want to see us all in little individual booths. I want to see maybe more theatres where more people from more diverse backgrounds with mixed ability from everywhere across the globe can meet and speak and have conversations. So I suppose the big thing is I would like them to be more accessible, a little bit cheaper, but pay their artists more. And I would like I'm wondering, will we value them properly after this? Will we value theatre properly after this? Will we understand what we've lost? And how long do we have to sit in this situation to know what we've lost? Because what we've lost is essential, I think, to moving forward as evolving as a species. You know, this here doesn't help anything except our brain. That is it. That's the only sense being developed by this, in my opinion. Only organ, rather. You know what I mean? The only aspect of it's not a sense, but you know what I mean? The only aspect is an intellectual one, and ultimately it creates a bigger divide for me. So I'm not, it's not the answer I know that you want, or even that I don't even know how to answer it. I'm more excited about what will bring us together than what will change.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
No problem.
And that is a brilliant question, and I think a brilliant note to end this on. Catriona, thank you so much. You've given us an incredibly rich, personal look into your process, and into kind of an idyllic sounding rehearsal and collaborative creative process. Thank you so much for your time and the way you answered everyone's question with such genuine consideration and perspicacity.
I'll be pulling out the dictionary now when I get off to know what that means.
You were brill. You were absolutely brill.
Thanks a million.
To everyone who joined us for the last 2 hours, thank you so much for your time. It's really lovely to see everyone in these things. For anyone who's free at the same bat time, same bat channel next week, we'll be talking to Martina Mayok, all the way from New York. God bless Zoom. She'll be talking about her work as a playwright and how she likes to work with actors when developing her scripts and what the relationship is between playwright and actor. One of the downsides of a digital webinar is you can't give the person who's just giving you their time, their thought, their expertise a round of applause that they so richly deserve. But one of the nice things we've discovered with these is you can still express your admiration by offering the Irish Sign Language applause. So I'd invite everyone to applaud Catriona with fabulous jazz hands.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a million. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you, Catriona.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. I hope to see some
Thanks
of you
for being
next
my
week.
guinea pigs.